is Becoming a Single Parent by Choice, What's It Really Like? Sponsored by our friends at Seattle Sperm Bank. And with that, I pass it off to someone I could not have more admiration for, our fearless leader, our founder and CEO, Karen Thayer.
That's a tough act to follow. Hello, I'm Karen Thayer. I'm the founder and CEO of Fertility Planit, and I couldn't be happier to welcome you all here today. I just have to take a moment to just take this in because we've been working for years on Fertility Planit and had this vision of doing this conference and bringing this content and hopefully this value to you. And you know, it's our first day. The dream has finally happened. We're standing here. It's been so much work and so much fun putting it together, and it's just amazing that we're all here together today. So one thing that I wanted to, I was just thinking about it this morning. You know, I've got these opening remarks, and I'm going to kind of scrap them. Because I was thinking this morning that when I was growing up, there was so much stigma around, you know, a woman being pregnant on her own. I was growing up, and I thought to myself, you know, you sort of were educated to kind of view a woman who got pregnant on her own, an unmarried woman, was something to be, you know, ashamed of, guarded against. You know, that's like the worst thing that could ever happen to you. Never let that happen. People, when that happens, go to other countries and like have babies out of sight, out of view, give them away to other people because you couldn't possibly be a single parent by choice. Like, that wasn't even a term that was sort of bandied about when I was growing up. And I never imagined that at 39 years old, that would be absolutely my best possible choice in front of me, and that I would embrace it wholeheartedly, which is exactly what I did. And I struggled very hard to become a single parent by choice, and it was finally, you know, successful for me. My son is now a year and a half. And then I guess the next part of that is, you know, a lot of people will say to me, you know, you're so brave, it must be so hard doing all of this on your own. And I will say to you, sure, there are days when it's really hard, really hard. I have a full-time job outside of managing Fertility Planit. I am the sole provider to my son. I am the sole, you know, I manage our household. And there are days when it's really hard, but then I kind of look at my friends who are parenting in a different context. It's hard for them too, right? Parenting is hard. You will have less time to yourself. It's a lot of juggling, but at the end of the day, what you get in return is family. And what I can tell you is, as a single parent by choice, having that family is just so worth it. It's so worth it. So I want to just introduce my fellow panelists. We have Sarah Brokaw, who's a licensed therapist and a New York Times best-selling author of the book Fortitude, and she has a new book coming out she's going to tell us about. This is Lisa Hochberg, who is a cancer survivor and who became a parent by doing basically everything. Everything you have to do, it's like everything she did, she became a parent through a surrogate, through an egg donor, and through a sperm donor. And can't wait to hear more about that. And this is Scott Brown, who, remind me exactly what your title is at California Cryobank.
Director of Client Experience.
Director of Client Experience at California Cryobank. So they're all incredibly articulate and interesting. They're going to share their different sort of connections to this topic. I also just wanted to thank Ustream, who is our online event partner. In case it isn't already perfectly obvious, everything that's happening here is being recorded live. The session we're doing is live streaming right now on the web. You can view it on Facebook. You can view it on our Ustream channel. There are conversations going on around the event online, on Facebook right now, on Twitter right now. So you can really participate in that online event while you're here. And importantly, all of your friends and community who are interested in these topics can also attend the event online and participate in conversations there. And I think without further ado, we'll get the panel started. Sarah, would you like to share with us a little bit about what your connection is and how far along you are?
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad you were able to come in and be curious enough to hear what we have to say. Obviously, I'm 35 weeks pregnant. I can't hide it anymore like I could a few months ago. Let me just begin by saying that I had no idea. If you were to tell me that I was going to be here 4 years ago saying that I was going to be a single mom, I would kind of laugh in your face and say, there's no way. Because I already had this agenda that I was going to be married and I was going to have my kid. And even though I knew that I was going to do it at a later point in life, I didn't ever imagine myself, just like you didn't, to be a single mom. Even though I had written a book called Fortitude, I don't know if anyone has ever heard of that book, but basically the purpose of writing that book was to empower women between the ages of, say, 35 and 65, to help us recognize that even if we get to a certain point in our lives, we're still relevant. And I know that a number of women, including myself, struggled with that because there were certain milestones we hadn't reached. In my situation, when I was 38, past 35, I wasn't married and I didn't have children. And here I was also a psychotherapist trying to empower women to find their voices. And I couldn't even find my own. So I made it my mission to write a book about how we can empower each other and empower ourselves. What I had done was I figured out 5 essential values that we needed to use in order to find our inner voice. And Mike, can you put the list, the 5 values? I usually don't do this during presentations or conferences, but each time I've spoken, people will say, can you say that again? So I just thought this would be an easy cheat sheet for everyone. With those 5 values, I felt that as long as you can define those 5 values in your own words, then you will have fortitude. Your voice will be heard. I was able to incorporate those 5 values by writing the book, obviously, and focusing on my mission, and then coming out to California and starting my own private practice after leading a very successful practice in New York. But what I kept avoiding was about the possibility of having a child on my own. I think that I kept keeping my hands over my eyes and saying, there will be a man who will come along and get me pregnant. But then 40 hits, and then 41 hits. And I still didn't have a man in my life. I know that I had frozen eggs, but I also didn't know what was going to happen with those eggs because we still don't have enough research, right, on what happens to those eggs. So once I kind of said, you know what, I can either, experience this moment as a crisis moment or a sparkling moment and say, you know what, at the end of the day, what's most important to me is to have a child. How am I going to go about doing it? So of course, I, made the last attempt in finding the appropriate guy to be the father. That didn't work out. I went to Cryobank. I bought a couple of vials. We were talking about it. Vial 11938 and something like 6482. So, right. So having those vial numbers, did kind of ease my anxiety, but I still, I think, was holding on to this hope that there was going to be a man who was going to come in and impregnate me, and I was going to successfully get pregnant and have a kid by the time I was 42, and everything was going to be easy. It didn't happen. But something else miraculous happened. I was set up with a man who was fantastic, terrific, beautiful. He's a model, he's an architect, he was a surfer. He was, half Asian, just a perfect mix. But he didn't come out of the closet. No one knew he was gay. So one night, I'm sitting there thinking, well, this is the night. I got a bottle of wine. We sat down. I got myself dressed up in a black dress. I lit the entire house up with candles. And I got the liquid courage. And I had asked him, I said, so what's your dating status? He goes, well, I'm glad you're asking. And I thought he was going to say, I'm going through a breakup, or I'm married and she doesn't feel comfortable. And he said, I'm gay. And then I burst into laughter. And he thought, why is she laughing? And I said, I was here to seduce you tonight. You now ruined my entire plan. From that moment on, we became that much closer. A couple of months later, it was on my 41st birthday, I proposed to him. I said, I'm going to preface this by saying I will not be upset, I won't be angry, but you know how badly I would love to have a child. He goes, yes. And I said, how would you feel if you were to be the sperm donor? And he looked at me, and this is my side, he's a totally different side. He said, unequivocally, I would be honored. His side is that he was sitting there looking at me like shaking, but that being said, it was the best decision I've ever made in my entire life. Not only did he turn out to be a terrific guy, but he also has been a terrific supporter of me during this process. Now, this process took some time. It took 2 years for us to go through this. It wasn't like he could just go into the bathroom in a clinic, do his thing, take the sperm, put it in a petri dish. We had to find our own attorneys. We had to determine what his role was going to be, whether he was going to be on the birth certificate or not be on the birth certificate. we had to also determine at that point, because he's Asian, he was a carrier of hepatitis B. And in the state of New York, which is where we were going to do it, they overruled our decision. So I had to do it in LA, which also turned out to be a blessing. But we had to go over these hurdles. Now, you can imagine that in that process, you're going to either really become that much closer or you're not. We became that much closer, which was a testament to, I think, my judgment of him, that I picked the right guy, and also him being a really good man. Fast forward, after a few rounds of doing IVF and IUI, and feeling quite discouraged and thinking, why am I doing this? I'm doing this on my own. How am I going to get through this process? I can't even get pregnant. It was last May or June. It was going to be my third and final round of IVF. And my doctor said, this is your cycle. I know it. And I'm like, well, you said that every single time before. This is not my cycle. I have a 42-and-a-half-year-old egg. I don't know if it's going to work. Voila. It worked. And since then, now I'm 35 weeks pregnant. Of course, I have all the same fears, but the difference is that I removed my hands from my eyes. And I'm facing this with curiosity as much as I can. There are moments in which I do have anxiety, but I think by allowing myself to be curious about other women's experience, had a great talk with Lisa about she's easing some of my fears, and also going back to those 5 values and saying, as long as I incorporate those 5 values that I defined in my own words, this is going to be one fantastic journey. So I think I'm going to end there because I want to give the other speakers some time to talk. And that's it.
Thank you so much, honestly. Lisa, would you like to share? So we're going to have conversations and ask more questions, but it'd be great for you just to share sort of a basis of sort of how you became a parent and what it took to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always knew I wanted to be a mom. At 29, I got married with a great guy, and I was on my way to this path. At 31, I got divorced, and then dated for the next 10 years, and found myself to be 41, hadn't found my guy, and the clock was ticking. And it's interesting because 41 seems to be this age, but instead of making the decision to be a single mom at 41, I got diagnosed with breast cancer. So that was going to put a crink in my dating style. And but what it also did was it pushed me to really think about what I wanted in life. And I knew that chemo could change my fertility. I mean, it was already not so great at 41, but chemo could really put an end to it. So I froze embryos. I picked a sperm donor from California Cryobank, and I created embryos with my eggs at 41. I went through breast cancer treatment, chemo, radiation, double mastectomy, and it all was successful and cancer-free and ready to give, thank you. You know, my hair grew back in and I was ready to just live my life. But so now I'm 43 and I'm still not a mom and I have these frozen embryos and I think it's time. And I honestly don't know if had I not gone through the cancer treatment, if I would have, made it to that point, who knows? And it doesn't matter. But at 43, I decided I'm going to be a single mom. And because of my cancer, it was a risk to my health to get pregnant and go through IVF and all that. So I had to hire a surrogate. So I found this amazing woman, and we implanted the embryos, and I was so excited to be a mom. It was finally going to happen. But it didn't work. So, okay, undeterred, I decided that at that point I was 44, I think, and just really, I couldn't use my own eggs. And so I decided to get an egg donor. And it was actually a somewhat easy decision for me. I wanted to have some control over the genetics of my child. I certainly thought about adoption, but for me, I wanted to try to find an egg donor that had some similar qualities to me, and I ultimately found what a good friend of mine calls the "I can't believe it's not Lisa" egg donor. She has so many qualities that I have, and it was really quite exciting. So not only was I willing to do an egg donor, I was excited about my egg donor. And I was already really excited about the sperm donor, this amazing guy that when I used him for my embryos, all my friends said, you have to have this guy's baby before you meet someone else because no one will have genes like him. So here I had this amazing egg donor and this amazing sperm donor and this amazing surrogate. It is the holy trinity of fertility. And we created 17 embryos, 17 high-quality embryos. This is what happens when you have people in their 20s doing IVF, because both donors were in their 20s. And of the 17 embryos, I only wanted one child, and there was one embryo who was kind of ahead of the rest. So we picked that one embryo, and he's my son. And I have a 7-month-old boy named Joshua. He's so beautiful and so amazing. I feel so lucky that the science existed for me to have a baby in this way. And to what Karen was saying earlier, some days are difficult, some days are easy, but overall, I'm happy. I'm at peace. I'm a mom, like I always wanted to be, with the most beautiful boy. And I do still would love to find a man and have that family unit at some point. It just didn't happen in the order in which I thought it would. And so sometimes life doesn't happen the way that you think it will, but I could never have envisioned my life being as beautiful as it is right now. So I will pause there.
Thank you so much. Scott, you have made a lot of happiness possible here. Thank you, and California Craving.
We have, and it's absolutely a pleasure to be here. I obviously have the personal connection through California Cryobank, where my role is sort of multifaceted, but ultimately the most important thing I'm responsible for is making sure that our clients have amazing experiences from beginning to middle to end, to helping you find your right donor, to working with your physician to make sure everything is going right, and to working with you for potentially the rest of yours and your child's life to make sure that we stay in touch, we keep medical updates available for you and your child, and potentially help you unite with the donor if that's what you and your child decide later in life. So that's sort of the professional side of what I do. But personally, my attachment here is that I have a very close friend of my wife and I who decided at 39 that she wanted to be a mother. And we sort of went through this whole process with her, so much so that she actually moved in with us to save up money and be able to prepare for when she actually had her son. So I am a single godparent by choice, which isn't quite the ranking that you guys hold, but I'm very, very proud of that. And so it's been a really interesting experience for me because I've obviously worked with a lot of people and helped a lot of people start their families, single women, lesbian couples and heterosexual couples, but to live it every day in a very close proximity and to understand sort of the highs and the lows and the challenges and the pros and the cons has sort of given me a better perspective, I think, on everything I do and all the people that I get to help in my professional life. I think it's important for you guys all to realize that there's a lot of women out there making this decision for themselves. Roughly 3,500 women a year come to the cryobank to start their families on their own. We do a lot of work with different organizations that support single mothers by choice, both online and through local connections. So there's actually a lot of support out there. This is an incredible starting point, an incredible resource to have in your back pocket, but know that there are other people out there and other opportunities out there to meet other women and talk to other women and build bonds with other women. If you don't start here today, this is a great opportunity right in front of you. To sort of anticipate some of the challenges and support through the process, because it's hard. I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, and being a parent, sharing the experience with my wife, it's hard. It's what they said. Parenting is hard, but it's incredibly worthwhile. It's incredibly worth it. It's the greatest thing in the world and the hardest thing in the world, and I guess that probably is why it's so great, because you put so much into it. But at the end of the day, there are great options for you as single women. There are known donors. There are lots of things you can do to make sure that you don't experience sort of the situation that you might be aware of that's going on in Kansas right now. It's getting a lot of media about the state going after the donor for child support and things like that. none of that is a real risk if you do it all the right way. There's ways to protect yourself from all that stuff. There's ways to protect your rights as a parent. There's ways to protect the donor so that he's never at any risk. There's ways to protect your privacy. There are anonymous donor options. There are open donor options. There are known donor options. It's all out there. And I promise you that this part of the process, choosing a donor and getting pregnant, is not the hardest part about being a single. That's the good news and the bad news. Good news is it's not the hardest part. Bad news is it's really not the hardest part. I wish I could tell you it got easier from here, but it really doesn't. But again, it's also worth it, and I know you guys might have specific questions about the process or donor selection. I'm happy to answer any of that, either in this forum or afterwards, or I'll give you contact information if you want to do it, because I know sometimes it's hard to discuss this stuff publicly. So we're here to help, and there are a lot of great options, and we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. And they also have an exhibit booth in the hall, so you can go and see him. You'll be at the booth later, won't you?
I will be at the booth later,
Okay.
as will some other people.
Yes, very good. So one thing that I didn't expect, I guess sort of, intellectually, when I kind of thought, I'll be a single parent by choice because this makes sense. Like sometimes I can be very in my head and very thinky about it. I personally find that I sometimes still struggle with what my feelings are around my identity as a single mother by choice. I think it's funny enough, like the getting pregnant part and the sort of working that out part, I felt like there was a lot of community and support around that. But now sometimes I just kind of struggle sometimes with this feeling of I'm a single mother by choice. What does that mean? And I don't want to say I feel stigmatized, but I still feel somewhat other, which is why I feel like Fertility Planet is so important as a resource, because it's sort of creating that sense of community and support that I personally didn't have when I was kind of making important choices around this, and I want others who are making the choices to feel better supported. But like, at what point did you sort of, like, how did you find, both of you, how did you sort of make that shift within yourself to, I know this is sort of a non-traditional choice, but like, how did you make peace with that choice for yourself? That knowing that you were entering into something where there aren't a lot of role models, there aren't a lot of visible, successful models of what it is that we chose. And I still feel like that today sometimes, like, where is that role model for me who's maybe just a little bit ahead, who can kind of show me how to do this beautifully and well? So I'm just kind of wondering when and how you made that shift to embrace this kind of, this unknown frontier in many ways.
Well, it was never a struggle for me. I just always knew I wanted to be a mom, so there was never even a question. So this was my path, and I had a lot of support from day one, from family, friends, everybody, and I feel very proud of my choice and have only been met with positive reaction from the people in my life. So for me, it isn't a struggle, at least not yet.
Right.
So I actually can't relate to that particular emotion.
Right. I think that also might be, I think in Los Angeles, people are very fortunate in that there are so many ways to have families here, and so many visible models of different families.
Yes, I think you're right.
I think in other parts of this country and in other parts of the world, making those choices is much more difficult. I think we're really privileged to be in an environment here where there is so much visible and tacit support for these kind of still non-traditional choices, I think.
But I think ultimately, though, no matter what you're feeling, because I can understand why you would feel that way, but I think ultimately taking this path is about doing what you think is right for you. And what anyone else thinks, that they can think what they think, but ultimately you have to just decide what is right for me and make it happen.
Right.
I don't know, what about you, Sarah?
It's really interesting, because I think I've experienced both. There's been moments of extreme doubt, but I think that the doubt stemmed from how I've been groomed growing up, that my parents had set a blueprint of what it is to have the ideal family. They had 3 girls. My mom had me when she was 29. I was the youngest. They're married. They're still married and actually happily in love, and they've been married now for almost 51 years. So, and I did come from a family, I don't know if I can share this, but, I'm Tom Brokaw's daughter. So there was a lot of pressure for me to follow a certain path, that I was supposed to get married like my sisters and have kids who could go to the top high schools or go to the top colleges. And here I was leading a very, very different life. So I put the pressure on myself to try to copy what my parents had presented to me as what it is to have the ideal family. That being said, knowing that that was, you know, the voice in the back of my head, like this is what I have to do in order to kind of fit into the Brokaw profile, the other part of me said, I'm being so hypocritical because here I am working as a therapist with so many women and telling them to continue to listen to their own voices. And I wasn't doing that. So at some point, I just said, I hate saying this and it's a curse word, but I say, fuck it, I'm going to do this. And once I made that decision, I also had a couple of mantras in my head. One mantra being that love is infinite. You can find love in a man, or if you're gay, you'll find love in a woman. For me, it was about finding love in a man, but I know that's infinite. What's not infinite is having a biological child. That's finite. And I knew that I had to stick with that mantra because it kept reminding me that this is my moment right now. And so when I kept saying that to myself and said, this is the time, this is when I'm going to do it, is when it happened. That was one mantra that really helped. I think the second one was, yes, I got a tremendous amount of support from, you know, my friends and from, you know, my colleagues. The one person who had difficulty with it was my father. And it wasn't necessarily because he thought that I was going against the traditional role, model that he presented to me. It was much more I was his baby girl. You know, who's going to take care of my baby girl? But he and I have worked so hard on talking about this, you know, that now he's following my lead. He said, you're gonna tell me what I need to do. I'm like, good, I'm finally the CEO, and you're gonna listen to me, which has never been the case before, and he's been fantastic. And I think also, what he's so happy about is that I'm having a boy. If I had a girl, listen to this, if I had a girl, she would have been the 18th girl in a row in our family. So I broke the streak. So he's like, it's the second coming. So, but I was going to say, I was just going to say, what is most important, if you're contemplating what I have done, you'd be amazed at how many people are there to want to help you. You'd be amazed, wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, yeah.
That there are going to be moments of self-doubt, of course. You're like, how am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I'm all alone. But really, you're not. We're all there as a community, no matter what. I mean, that's just how I think.
Children are magnets. They attract support and love.
And pregnancy. Everyone wants to do everything for you, you know, and ask a lot of questions, so.
That's true. There's,
Can I have one quick
yes, of
thing?
course, yes, yes.
One of the sort of the perspectives that I gained in being able to work with so many people and so many different types of families is just that it's not that there's a right way and a wrong way to have a family. There are a million ways now to have a family. You kind of touched on this, especially in LA, that I know when I speak to a lot of our clients about how they talk to their children eventually to explain to them the situation and where they come from, that it's not there's the only way that we're doing it is different. It's that there's some families have two mommies, some have two daddies, some have one daddy, some have one mommy, some have this, some have that, some have one kid, some have three kids. And it's the mindset that you bring into it that you're just part of this sort of new American tradition of family. This is what we are as a culture, and that the amount of support will far outweigh the amount of skepticism I think that you face, and that the more comfortable you are with it, you will radiate that confidence, and you will instill that confidence in your family and in your friends and in your acquaintances. And I know the grandparent question always comes up, parents and people, women worried about talking to their parents about it. And I gotta say, like, I've never even heard a bad story, but I'm not gonna say 100%, but the ability, the shot at having a grandchild far outweighs any issues they might have going into it. Give them time. I mean, the one important thing is you didn't make this decision overnight. It came to you over a long stretch of time. You've thought about it. You've thought about the financial implications, the personal implications, the responsibilities. Don't expect your family and friends to go, oh, cool. Like, give them time to sort of absorb it all and ask the questions that feels like they're questioning your decision. They are. It's because they care about you. Let them go through that process as well, because you've done it, and it'll make it a lot easier if you sort of go into it expecting them to have those questions of support as well.
That's a great point. I mean, for my parents, it is their first and probably only grandchild, so they're
Same here.
ecstatic.
They'll probably pay
here.
for the
Yeah.
IVF if you give it, if it's the only grandchild.
I just want to, we are going to ask if you have some questions. We're going to invite you to talk with us as well. But just to add to what Scott just said, it's funny listening to both Sarah and Lisa. I feel great about the decision I've made. Aiden, my son, could not be a bigger joy in my life. It's absolutely the best decision I've ever made. It only becomes tricky, and I only have feelings of self-doubt about identity and how I might be perceived when I stop and let fear creep in. It's only in those moments, like it happens in so many other parts of our life too. We're cruising along, we're in a flow, we're going for what we want, everything's great, and then once in a while, just those little fear, there's that little whisper of fear sometimes creeps in, and that's when I sort of sit back and go, oh my goodness, this is, it sort of causes me to doubt these own best decisions that I've made for myself. So as much as possible, I would say, expect the fear to creep in. It will be there, it will whisper once in a while. But if this is really something you want, 99% of the time, it'll be fantastic. It's almost like you have to let it be fantastic. You have to let it be as fantastic as you feel it is and you know it is, but also expect it, there will be those little questions still because there aren't too many visible role models yet. And that's partly what Fertility Planet is about, is to help offer role models to maybe some new choices.
And I was going to say, in addition to that, I think that the role models that we do have are not realistic. They're media figures. There are a lot of women out there, right, who are claiming that, I'm just thinking about all the celebrities, I can name them, just in one hand, who suddenly were able to adopt, and it only took 4 months to have them adopt. Or how is it possible, like, oh, I just had twins, it ran in my family. And these are a lot, and then also a lot of the women are, single. They have the money, they have the trainers so they can get back, to their pre-pregnancy shape. They have all the baby nurses, they have all the nannies. That's inspiring, but it's not realistic for the normal woman. So I feel like that's why I was so drawn to Fertility Planet, because it's normal, everyday women who are choosing to do this, to choose this path. So I'm really happy that you actually reached out to me last summer to say, let's make this happen. Mm-hmm. And it was great also to meet Lisa, who's going to be another great friend of mine, who's, a single mom by choice. And she's not out in the tabloids showing that she has this baby and that she got, maybe you will.
Not yet.
Not yet, right. But I think that's what is so important, to have something like Fertility Planet so that we can convey this type of message to everyone here, that it is possible, it is doable, and it's totally normal to have fear, and it's totally normal to be ecstatic, and it's totally normal to be curious, and it's totally normal to be confused. You're not alone.
Thank you. It's absolutely true. Aisha, I'd like to open it up for questions. Does anyone in the room have questions for us at this point? You can raise your hand, and Aisha will come around to you with the microphone. You don't have to stand up or anything. No questions? Are you sure?
In the back.
Okay. Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, so I'm monitoring social media. We've actually gotten a lot of private questions, direct message to us. So any of you in the audience are obviously welcome to do that if you prefer not to reveal who you are and want to get your question answered now. But one person was actually directing a question to you, Scott. And again, I'm not going to say who they are because they've direct messaged us, so I'll keep their anonymity. They didn't say they did.
Maybe.
But asking you
dinner
about
tonight or
the
anything?
cost, because everyone seems to have mentioned California, or both of our panelists, not Karen, have mentioned California Cryobank. So asking about the cost of doing what the ladies on the panel have done, and I guess speaking to, actually we just have another comment asking about how much it cost you, and
Sure.
I think probably to Sarah's point about the reality of what it does cost.
So cost can vary fairly dramatically based on how long it takes you, the type of procedure you're having, the number of vials you want to purchase. One of the important things to remember is that this is not necessarily a one and done process, that the average is about 4 medicated IUI cycles per successful pregnancy. So you kind of want to go into it with that in mind. The other thing to consider is your age, and certainly the younger you are, the easier it is to get pregnant. The older you are, the more cycles it may take. You may want to look at IVF directly. All that said, there are a number of well-accredited, well-established national sperm banks. California Cryobank is here in Los Angeles. There are a couple other banks who are represented here outside. And as long as you're choosing to use a fully accredited, fully licensed sperm bank with a strong reputation, get recommendations through your physician, you're in good shape in terms of the donor screening and all the other really important things, all the medical and legal issues. I want to stress that up front, that there are cheaper ways to go about this. That doesn't mean it's a better way. It means it's a cheaper way. And you know, you can buy cheap car seats. You don't buy cheap brakes. I mean, when things are important, you actually want to make sure you're going about it the right way. All that said, I typically tell people that they should probably expect to spend somewhere in the $2,500 to $3,000 range as sort of a jumping off point. We have programs that provide free storage when you purchase 5 vials. We buy vials back if you end up not using them. There are shipping costs associated with vial purchases, but if you're here in Los Angeles, you can always stop by our facility, which is right over in West LA, pick your tank up and take it with you, so that'll save you some money. But
I drove from the cryobank to Beverly Hills with my sperm donor in the backseat.
Yeah,
I mean, not
strap
the
it
donor, the package in the backseat.
Yeah, the package in the backseat.
It's a very surreal experience.
Yeah, it's a little tank about that big.
The tank, right.
The vial is actually a little tiny vial of sperm. But I would say $2,500 to $3,000 is a good sort of place to start to wrap your head around. Flex spending accounts, if you have them, can be used. This is a medical procedure, so you can either plan for it ahead of time as you prepare for the following year, or if you have money in your flex account, that's a great place to use it. Insurance can cover some aspects of the process. Sperm is not one of them. And depending on what state you're in, you guys are on California, people online are in different states, check with your local insurance what it covers. Massachusetts has great fertility coverage. Illinois has great fertility coverage. California, not so great, unfortunately. $3,000. It can certainly be done for less, but then
and
you
there
risk.
are ancillary costs too. I mean,
That's just the sperm. That's just the sperm.
Sperm is the
Yeah.
cheapest.
That's just
Yeah,
the sperm.
absolutely.
And there can be, you know, there are consultations with the fertility clinics. Obviously, there are procedures in the clinics. You know, I think it really, I think it can vary quite a lot. But I think on average, to do a medicated IUI is probably at least $10,000. No. And IVF, and
It's like
then it goes up from there.
15 to 20, yeah.
Really, it's an investment. But what I would say though, because a lot of women have asked me obviously about the cost of IVF and me doing it 3 times, yeah, not everyone can afford that. But I do believe that there are some now discounted IVF,
Mini IVF.
mini IVF,
Yeah,
right?
check with different doctors, do some work online. There's different ways to go about it, where they sort of do a package deal. The doctors are aware of the cost. Ask a lot of questions.
Ask a lot of
Yeah.
questions. Every step of the way, ask your questions.
The other thing to really be aware of is that these costs can mount very quickly. And if you are 38, 39 years old and you're potentially looking at doing 4, 5, 6 IUIs before making the decision to jump to IVF, it's not unreasonable to say, you know what, I may just want to cut my losses here. Let's go right to IVF. Because not only are you losing money on all these IUI cycles, which are going to cost you thousands of dollars each, you're losing time. And if you don't have frozen eggs or embryos, you're using your own eggs.
Yep.
Every cycle you go through, you're not losing 1 egg. You're losing potentially dozens, hundreds, thousands of eggs. So you want to really sort of maximize your opportunity, and sometimes that means just biting the bullet and going right to IVF, unfortunately.
And there's the temptation to cut costs. Like I have friends who come to me and say, oh, what do you think about what I'm doing? And they're meeting people on the internet who have not been tested for anything, and they're sort of meeting up in a bar, a cafe. Like I have some friends who, you know, single women and lesbian couples who will like sort of meet men on the internet, and then they'll talk, oh, would you like to be a sperm donor? You seem really great. And then he'll create like a fresh sample, and they'll light some candles, and they'll sort of literally get like a little plastic syringe, a sterilized plastic syringe, and hope for the best. And it might be free at that moment, but there are so many complications, obviously, that can arise financially and legally, health-wise. It's just not worth it. What would you say to that?
I agree, and I also think it's the same thing as a therapist who's working now with, I would say, 8 couples. All 8 couples are going through a divorce. So when you're choosing about having a child, don't think that your immediate option is to just get married. Because then, this is what I'm saying now, a lot of these women are towards the end of their 30s, their purpose is to have a baby, procreate, they've hit their 40s, and now they're looking at each other going, now what? So they're spending all this money and going to couples therapy, then they're gonna have to do mediation, if mediation works, If that doesn't work, then they have to go to a lawyer. Now that's over $150,000 in one shot. So that's why I think that you have to just think about the multiple options that you do have. And we're in a country, it may be more acceptable, you know, in, say, Los Angeles and New York and Chicago, but at least we're in America where you have this choice.
Yes. We have a question here in the audience. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Thank you. You are providing such great information, and I actually got a couple tweets from some single friends. Some friends who have a current boyfriend, some friends who are completely single without man in their life, and so forth. So looking back on kind of your journey, all your individual journeys, there's women out there right now watching on Ustream who are like, oh my God, I'm kind of with this guy, and it's that pressure of, do I stay with him because he might be the baby daddy, or do I, you know, cut my losses now and get a reality check and kind of like really just start this process. So for a woman who might be in her like early 30s, who wants to be a mother, but doesn't really know what's next, what would you guys, what one piece of advice could each of you give for somebody who, you know, may have to choose, you know, want to choose to, you know, take a journey on her own, unplanned? Maybe Sarah, you could start.
Why don't you answer that?
Well, so yeah, I'll take that
Or
one.
okay.
I think that being married is not the key to happiness. I'm a big proponent of marriage. I hope to be married, but being married, having a child, being married, that doesn't ensure happiness, right? And I think the biggest mistake that you can be, or the biggest gift you can give your child is to be happy. So if you're in an unhappy marriage, I don't think that's any great shakes. So for me, it was about what is right for me and being happy and having the baby first on my own, as opposed to feeling the pressure to be with someone that may not be perfect. I would much rather take that path. And what's interesting is that, so my son is 7 months old, and I've been asked out multiple times, and I find that men are more attracted to me now because I'm so confident and free and at peace, and I don't need you, and
there's no pressure.
There's no pressure. And so, you know, as opposed to this, oh, I'll be a single mother and men won't want to be with me, it's been the exact opposite experience.
So my piece of advice would actually be, around the planning of it. So I kind of made peace with this whole, I'm doing this as a single mother, and that's okay because, as Sarah said earlier, you have a very specific window in which it might be possible for you to have a biological child. I wanted to give that my best shot, and so I kind of thought, okay, right, I can prioritize that. But what I didn't anticipate is that you need a lot of help. There are lots of expenses. So you really want to think through, you really want to plan it. It becomes like it's a project you have to manage, right? Where am I going to find my help? What's the child care situation going to be like? Am I going to be working full-time? So I work full-time right now. I'm the sole provider to my child, and then I work on Fertility Planit at night while he sleeps. And that has not been easy. It's been totally worth it, but I kind of knew that that's what I would have to do, and I had made peace with that. So really thinking through, where am I going to get my support and the child care? Where's the money going to come from? Am I willing to sort of maybe reduce my standard of living because it means I get to have a child? So I had to make a lot of financial choices around that. I don't live the way I did when I was a single professional, footloose and fancy-free. All of my, any disposable income I have is completely directed to my son. So that's just how it is. It's fine. But I had to think ahead about that, and I had to be okay with that. So that would be my advice, is really think through the financial and the support. Make sure you have the support around you. Who's going to help you? You will not be able to look after your child 24/7. You will need a breather. You know, friends are great. A lot of people say they're going to help, but
On their
who is really going to be there to help you, especially if you don't live near your family members or parents, especially if it's taking them a while to come around to the idea that this is okay for them too.
And Karen, that is a really huge point. You have to let go of your prior life. Life will never be the same.
It'll
And
be so much better.
it's amazing, and I love it. But I can't just go to a movie when I want to. I can't get my nails done when I want to. And that's okay. So I think it's accepting that this old life is over here, and this is my new life, and kind of letting go and just making sure that you have all the childcare planned, and planning it is really important.
Because you don't want to get into a situation where you are really struggling. Lisa, I can't say enough how true that is. What's most important for your child is that you are happy and at peace with this decision. They will take all their cues from you. Are you genuinely at peace with this? Are you happy? Like, whatever's happening with you has such a tremendous impact on that child. You have to really feel, you've got to, as much as possible, do what you can to feel good about yourself throughout this process, because they will pick up on everything. And that is so true what you said.
Actually, we have sorry, not to interrupt, but there's a question that really follows along with that. Actually, a couple of people have tweeted in asking, again, anonymously, if any of you are looking or thinking about siblings for the children that you have, because it sounds like I think they'll all be single children.
Funny that you say that right before you jump in. In answer to yours, is that one of the real regrets, I guess, that I do hear from single moms is that they waited until they were in their later 30s to start, and that meant they really didn't have an opportunity to have a sibling unless it became donor egg and surrogate, which gets significantly more expensive. And so if you're actually even considering it in your early 30s and you think you are potentially interested in having more than one child, you kind of got to get started, because it can take a long time, and you crack that 35-40 barrier for your first child.
Would you tell them to freeze their eggs? What would you tell them? What would be the first 5 steps?
The first 5 steps to getting ready to be a single mom?
Concrete
Well, no,
steps.
just if they want to be a mom and they're, say, 32, and they don't know if they want to be with this man, what would you say to them? If you're saying it's going to become significantly harder, would you tell them, would you recommend freeze your eggs? What would you tell them?
Well, that's a financial investment. So if money is going to be an issue, taking the time and money to freeze your eggs certainly extends hopefully your opportunity to have a child later in life, but it doesn't really solve your immediate problem. I would say that raising a child in a bad relationship potentially is a lot harder than raising a child as a single parent. So if I'm not even sure if this is the right guy, he's not the right guy.
Exactly.
Right off the bat. I'm not telling you.
I think if you're going to choose, it sounds like I would say, or maybe you would say, then it's worth the investment in freezing your eggs.
It's worth the investment. And I will go so far as to say that while egg freezing has improved significantly from a scientific perspective, embryo freezing is much better. Sperm freezes really well, embryos freeze and thaw and grow really well. Eggs, it's still kind of a toss-up, so depending on how many you get, how well the vitrification process goes, who your doctor is, it doesn't guarantee you. Freezing eggs doesn't mean I'm going to be able to have a baby someday. Freezing embryos potentially gets you much, much closer to that process. So you could, at that point, choose a donor, create the embryos using the donor, and have those as a backup plan. And then if you meet the right guy, well, then you can go about it that way. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I'm Jamie Williams with the Surrogacy Source, and I kind of wanted to hit a little bit on your question as well. One of the best advantages for planning to go through single parenting is instead of Hi, I just wanted to get to your question about your friends and whether or not they're with the right person or they think they may be with the right person. Going through single parenting, you have absolutely no chance of having to go through that divorce and possibly going through a huge child custody and losing part of your child's life, and also the child support thing, or having to share your child. This is your child, it's solely your child, and nobody will ever be able to take that child away from you. And that's a very big thing to think about, instead of just rushing on a partner who you think, oh, let's just have a baby, and it may just be very, very ugly and very confusing for the child.
Yeah. Do we have any questions, any more questions from up there?
No, they didn't get to answer the sibling
Oh,
question.
sorry.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to say we had a few about that, so I think addressing that would be a great idea.
Well, I'll say that I would love for my son to have a sibling. I would. But based on my age now and how much more expensive it would be to have another child, especially for me because I would have to go through surrogacy again, which is quite expensive, that I don't think I will have another child in the way that I had. If I meet someone and that situation changes financially, I'm open to it. I'm extremely open to it. I'd love for there to be a step sibling. I think think the theme here is just being open. I just don't know what's going to happen. So
And we have another, sorry about that. We have another question right back here.
I was wanting you to speak to the idea of the known donor versus the anonymous donor. And if you could just give me your thoughts on the idea of how the child will react once they grow up and they would like to have some contact with their male parent, and how you feel about that and what your thoughts are about that.
Yes.
Because as much as it is difficult to have
So
divorces.
if I'm understanding correctly, you're kind of asking around anonymous versus known donors and having contact versus no contact and how we think about
from
that.
the child's perspective rather than the legal or financial perspective.
So we don't have too much time left, but I'd love for each of us just to kind of respond to that, because that's a really, really big question, a very important question. So I initially started my journey with a partner, and with a male partner, my boyfriend, and we had a lot of different failed pregnancies, and then the relationship kind of dissolved under the weight of all the disappointment. And then the doctors were telling me, you're running out of fertility, your ovarian reserve is dwindling, you better do this now or never. And that's what really kick-started me into thinking, I better do this now or never. So that's when I kind of moved forward. And I initially had 2 IVF and 6 IUI with an anonymous donor. Going back to choices in America versus other places, I was an American living in England, and in England, it's very difficult to get anonymous donors. There are no anonymous donors. It's the policy of that country that you have to be an open donor or not a donor at all. And because they only have open donors in England, there are very few of them. So I actually went to Denmark 16 times in 3 years to have all sorts of consultations and tests and blood work and treatments, and I had to coordinate like my work schedule, my holiday schedule, and getting on the EasyJet flight, and there was a snowstorm, and then I missed my ovulation, and I'd gotten there, and they couldn't. It was just a complete nightmare. But in any case, I had anonymous donors for a whole stretch of years, lots of anonymous donors, and it never worked for me. And it got to the point then where the fertility clinic said, we won't treat you anymore because you've exceeded our cutoff. Your FSH level, follicle stimulating hormone level, is now at 15.1, and that's so high, which in this country they would never tell you that's too high. But in Denmark, they're like 15.1, so over. Go to an egg donor, go to an adopt, it's not happening. And they wouldn't treat me anymore. And that's when I sat there and optimized my fertility naturally through a lot of just nutrition and mind, body, spirit work. And I had a friend who agreed to be my known donor. And now I am in a little bit of a work in progress situation. He's a known donor, he's a friend of mine. My son will know that's his father, but this person will be sort of a friend to us, less of a donor, more of a friend, but it's very much a work in progress. And there's so many questions to ask yourself around anonymous versus known. I'd love to hear what both of you think about it.
Well, I contemplated both. I did speak to a good friend about being the sperm donor, and ultimately that's not the way that we went, and I think for me that was the right decision. So having the anonymous...
Why was that the right decision for you, do you think?
Yeah, I think because it's complicated, and this way I have complete control over
legal control as well.
Legal control. I get to spend all my time. I don't have to worry about splitting time. And what if this, he gets married, or there's just so many complexities to it. I think there's a lot of wonderful aspects to it, obviously. But for me, it really, the anonymous way to go, I really like, because it certainly, with anyone in this situation, you have to figure out the messaging to your child. And for me, and I think this is really important to share, there's no secrets, that this is part of his story. And I'll be very open about the way that I went about this. And I will speak very glowingly about the kind of the background of the sperm donor.
Which you get tons of information about. When you seek an anonymous donor, California Cryobank, I can say with certainty, offers a wealth of information about your donor, more information than you might even have about your husband or about your boyfriend.
Absolutely.
Dreams. I mean, so much information. It's so, I was so grateful to see that. It was so helpful, and I thought, if this is the way it works, my son or daughter will know everything about their father.
Exactly, and I think that, and the final piece of this is, I do still very much expect there to be a father for my son at some point. And I want that person to be the father. So that was my path, and I feel good about it.
In terms of the information that you find on the donor, or as you're going through the process, it's really designed almost specifically now for single mothers and lesbian couples who are going to have this discussion very early on with their child. It's not just about statistics and ethnicity and height and weight and eye color and hair color, which is what it was 20 years ago when it was mostly heterosexual couples just trying to match dad. It's much more now about who this guy is as an individual. You see essays and poems and artwork, and you have the family medical history and genetic testing and STD testing and all the scholastic stuff and all the techie stuff. But at the end of the day, you get a much better sense of who he is as an individual. You get childhood photo series. You get all the sperm banks have their own versions of photos. You can hear his voice. There's audio interviews. There's staff impressions. We write about the guys. You really get as good a sense as we can give you about who he is as a human being, likes, dislikes, recipes that he likes to cook. I mean, there's so much that goes into it.
My sperm donor, his favorite food is mashed potatoes, and my favorite food is mashed potatoes, so it was perfect.
What more do you need?
What more do you need to know?
So it absolutely, I always tell people a quick anecdote that when my wife and I got pregnant, neither one of us ever had any idea that we were cystic fibrosis carriers, no family medical history, never came up. 17 weeks into my wife's pregnancy, she happened to be looking through her medical chart because we were going to change OBs because we didn't like the place we were. And she happened to notice, because they had done genetic testing on her because of her advanced age, cystic fibrosis carrier. And she's like, oh, that's weird. They never told me anything about that. And she called me at work, and I said, well, I know what that means, kind of, because of what we do, but let me go ask the genetic counselors. They said, no big deal. Just go downstairs to the lab, draw your blood, as long as you're not a carrier. 1 in 28 people are carriers, so nothing to worry about. Turned out I was a carrier as well, and 20 weeks into our pregnancy, we had to face the possibility that our daughter was going to be born, excuse me, this gets difficult. Was going to be born with cystic fibrosis. She wasn't. I'll cut to the chase. She wasn't, but I sort of half joke, if my wife had used a sperm donor, he would have been tested and it never would have been an issue for her. So you really do, both medically, family medical history-wise, and every other way, know so much more about these guys than potentially you would ever know about a husband, or any wife would know about her husband.
I am so sorry to do this, but we have like a minute and a half left. Sarah, do you want to just give a snapshot of why you went known versus anonymous?
Honestly, I think that I just saw myself with various paths that I could take, but I knew that the end goal was to have a kid. So it could have been cryobank. It could have been someone who I met, and just gotten pregnant, or it could have been a known donor. It just so happens at that moment in my life, Adrian shows up. And I just got very lucky. What I have to say, though, is that when we created the contract, yes, it's very complicated and it's very emotionally taxing. What I did put in that contract that they don't usually put is that the child will have the right to know who the father is. This is what I put in, starting at the age of 3 and 5, because I feel like developmentally they become curious about who the father figure is. And what you were saying, I don't believe in secrets. And I also believe that this child will get an idea that Adrian, because I have a feeling he's going to look a lot like Adrian, sorry, that's the guy, that he's going to start to question who Adrian is. Why keep that from him? So,
yeah, yeah. Talk about theme of openness. You basically stayed open to what presented itself to you at the moment in which you were ready. So that's great. I just want to say thank you to all of you for coming and listening to what we have to say and sharing with us in our experiences. Just as a reminder, this has been live streamed. All of the sessions here at the conference are being live streamed. So if you feel like your friends and your community would like to watch these programs, would like to ask further questions, if you would like to continue engaging in conversation with us, you are very welcome to use Twitter, Facebook, both during the conference and for the following year. The programs will all be available on our website for the following year when we will do this again in next January or February in Los Angeles. I really want to thank our sponsor, Seattle Sperm Bank, for making this conversation possible. They are the sponsor of this session. They have a booth out in the exhibit hall as well. And I guess if you go onto Twitter and Facebook, use the hashtag FPS13. And thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today and sharing your experiences with us. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.